Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Social Flight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have such a fun show for you this evening. Captain Laura Savino is here with us, author of Jet Boss, and I can tell you, having read this book, that you're in for a really, really fun evening. As always, we're here. We started Social Flight in order to support General Aviation and folks like yourselves. We are here to give you a venue, especially with our show tonight, Social Flight Live, that gathers everyone together and helps support us during the pandemic and well beyond, because this was a really challenging time, continues to be for the aviation industry, but it's been fascinating to see how everyone has been thriving during this. Aircraft values have really skyrocketed. People are discovering that general aviation has more value than ever before, and we just want to make sure that no one is left behind, and we glue this community together and help give you something every week here every Tuesday night on Social Flight Live with inspirational personalities and more. And so again, be sure to check that out on socialflight.com and the free Social Flight mobile apps. Now, Captain Laura Savino piloted the Boeing 777, the 767, 57, 47, 37, and the Airbus series of 319 and 320 as an international airline pilot and captain for United Airlines, as well as flying for Eastern and Pan Am. Like many commercial pilots, her journey to the flight deck included time as a flight instructor, a charter pilot, a freight pilot, and an aerial sightseeing pilot, among many, many other things. And her new book, Jet Boss, A Female Pilot Taking Risks and Flying High, I have to tell you, is an absolutely fascinating story of her aviation journey against the odds to reach her dream. I can honestly say that it is one of the most compelling books that I've read in a long time, and I simply couldn't put it down once I started reading it, and we're certainly going to talk about that tonight. Today, especially with her specific mission, I think it's important to point out, only 5% of pilots are female, and of those, less than 1% are captains. And Laura Savino's mission is to inspire people to go after what excites them with no apologies, no explanations, and I think to help make aviation more accessible to everyone, even regardless of their gender, background, etc. And so with that, I am going to bring Captain Savino on the line here, and please help me welcome to Social Flight Live, Laura Savino. How are you doing tonight, Laura?
Hi, Jeff. I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Well, I just want to say, let me fix here with our broadcast. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight. And as I said during my introduction, once I picked up your book, Jet Boss, I could not put it down. And I am sent a number of books. I cannot say that about all of the books I'm sent. And so it is a very sincere, compelling story. And I'd like to talk about your story tonight.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
So I want to start out, one of the things, the book really does take you into the cockpit of what it's like to be a commercial air pilot, but I find even more importantly what the path is, how challenging it is for anyone to get to the flight deck, and especially the left seat of some big heavy iron there. Tell me a little bit about, and viewers, about how you got started, where you came from to start your journey.
How I got started? Well, times have definitely changed as far as the path to the airlines, but I started off, so I grew up quite a long time ago, back in the Stone Ages, before there was the internet, or anything that really exposed you to anything in the world other than what you actually experienced or was in your life, Back then, you knew what your parents told you, maybe a teacher or something, but beyond that, you really had no idea. So back in like the 70s, the 80s, most airline pilots came from a heritage of airline pilots. It was something that was in the family, something that they were exposed to, or they came from the military. And I didn't have any of that. And the way that I did get into aviation was I happened to live just coincidentally, I lived under the arrival and departure corridor for Newark Airport. So I was always looking at airplanes, but I had nobody that I could ask any questions or anyone that could tell me anything about it. I did know that pilots were only men, which they actually were only men back then. But what happened was when I got into high school, I borrowed my mom's car one day and I just went out exploring. I found a small airport, Morristown Municipal, and walking around the field, I found a flight school and I figured out that you can take flying lessons, which just blew my mind as a teenager. I had no idea that was something that you could do. And I ended up getting a job at the airport and working my way through lessons, and I essentially worked for free my last couple of years of high school in exchange for flying lessons. And by the time I graduated, I had earned my private.
Yeah.
But I didn't tell anybody. I was, I had a cheerleader, I had a reputation to hold up, so I really just kept it a secret. It was just something I was doing on my own on the side. And from there, I went off to college, went to Purdue, which my son is at right now, go Boilermakers.
Oh, there you go.
I did try going into the military. I was turned down by all 4 branches because I wanted to go in as a pilot, and all the recruiters that I spoke to said there was no such thing, no female pilot positions, which wasn't really 100% true, but I guess word hadn't gotten out to them that women were allowed to do some limited flying. But in any case, and from there, just it's just a long path of building flight hours to eventually get to the airlines.
Well, I don't want to gloss over this too much because I'll tell you, when you go way back to the beginning of your story in the book, one of the things I really enjoyed about it is it felt like a time machine a little bit for me. You talk about this. This isn't just a book about, hey, this is like your struggle against the odds or something like that. This is really fun because it includes a whole lot of flying stories and a whole lot of other things. But I also loved it when you talked about the very beginning of what the days were like back when you were a kid. That maybe it's just that was the same for me, but you mentioned things, as you mentioned at the beginning of this, there's no internet, there's no mobile phones. This was a time when kids spent a lot of time unsupervised. and parents were blissfully ignorant of where their kids were and what they were doing all day long. And that was so true. And I love the way you described some of this. And you basically just kind of like wound your way to the airport once you had the keys to the car and hung out. Tell me a little bit, going back to those days, what that was like.
Well, it was, boy, gosh, to go back. So it was kind of sneaky. And I like in hindsight, I was actually like a really good kid and I was doing a good thing. I was dedicated. I wanted to learn how to fly, but it wasn't something that people around me approved of. And so it was kind of like ask, don't tell. My parents knew that I was at the airport. They knew that I was working there, that I'd gotten a job. And, they didn't have any problem with me working and getting a job. They kind of sort of knew I was taking flying lessons, but they didn't really ask a lot about it as long as I, kept my grades up and went to church and, never missed mass and all of that stuff. So it was like I was like living a double life. And I was going off to the airport and doing some pretty sneaky things. If you read the book, I guess, I had always been such a good girl growing up that when I suddenly had an airplane to myself and I could solo, I was taking the airplane up and just doing really crazy things that in hindsight, now that I know what I know that I had no idea what I was doing at the time.
Right.
And, but
I mean, that's kind of this dichotomy of the story. You on one hand, you're a supremely responsible individual who obviously has started out very responsible, good in school, did all these things, and then worked your way to where you are now. On the other hand, in these early days, even when you were just soloing and didn't even have your ticket, you have stories of going up and doing things that today, of course, in the world of ADS-B and tracking people and big tail numbers, which is something you point out,
right.
You could never get away with. Tell people a few of the things, admittedly, that we don't want anyone to ever go and repeat on their own.
So I had one friend, another guy at the airport who was also a teenager, and I named him Garrett in the book because I didn't actually want to say his real name. But we would go up and we would regularly like buzz his high school, or we'd go and buzz my high school. you know, when the kids were outside, either band practice, or I didn't write about all the times we did in the book. I think I just mentioned one particular time. We went to prom together, and then we flew down to Atlantic City and snuck into a bunch of casinos and illegally gambled. But on the way there and on the way back, we like buzzed our high schools. And it was, I mean, we did some crazy stuff. I used to go up, I would go over like West Point, and I'd wait for all the soldiers, you know, the cadets would be out there doing drills, and I would go and crop dust them and make them scatter. I just was doing some really, really fun, irresponsible things. But, you know, this is the thing, you know, everything I was doing was completely anonymous, and it was completely out of character for me because, as you mentioned, the aircraft back then, the tail numbers were like a square inch. You couldn't read them without walking right up to the tail. So you could do anything, and nobody had any idea, you know, any way of tracking you. And, you know, I would stay around the airspace where I was legal, where I didn't have to speak to anybody. But I would regularly go to like a PACCON and bus people. I taught myself aerobatics. I would do barrel rolls and loops and spins like over and over and over again. And, you know, I've had a few close calls, but this is not something I should be bragging about. Okay,
No,
nobody
well,
not do this. This is very irresponsible. It was wrong, and it was wrong, and I do have regrets, and it was a bad example. But it is my story, and you know, I feel bad for any of those people. Sorry I did that too.
Yeah, I don't want to glorify, because it's, as you said, it's wrong, it's irresponsible, and it's dangerous. And but at the same time, as a book, now that we're looking back on it, it also harkens to a different day and time, that it's fascinating to see that. And that, of course, you made it out alive of that. And I want to point out there's a lot of fascinating stories in there, things. You had some interesting things where you got into a lot of mischief. And I think that's one nice way of putting it to those that have yet to read Jet Boss. And it's interesting because it also takes us kind of along that line as to how you discovered kind of the hard way, to some degree, while still walking away from it, what it means to be responsible as a pilot. And when you started to see the rubber hit the road with, you know, friends, even doing things the right way, such as in an air show, et cetera, who lost their lives in that. So tell us a little bit about kind of that evolution from being a little crazy, breaking out of things, to starting to realize what it really means responsibility-wise to be a pilot.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. I grew up in one day. So I was a teenager, and Morristown had an air show. It was a big air show. There was like 50,000 people, and a good friend of mine at the airport. And that's another big part of why I was so attracted to aviation, why I stuck with it, because the aviation community is just amazing. They took me in. Nobody cared that I was, you know, that I was only 16, 17. Nobody cared that I was a girl, and it was very welcoming. One of the people that just took me under his wing at the airport was a young guy named Jimmy Dyer, who was a corporate pilot, and he flew a Lear 35, and he was just really a big brother to me at the airport. So Jimmy was very kind, and he brought me up, and he went through the whole show that he was going to be doing with me in the cockpit, just to show me it and to let me experience from under the canopy. But then I had to get out for him to actually perform the show, because the extra weight would slow him down and things wouldn't be quite as sharp. So I got out, and he ended up having a fatal accident during the air show, and the tail of the airplane fell off. They popped some bolts, and the tail fell off. And I don't think he did anything any different. You know, doing those little passes after I got out of the airplane is when I was in it. And it was, it made me realize in the blink of an eye that the stuff that I was doing was really stupid, and that flying is really dangerous, and that you have to take it very, very seriously. And I did after that. I was never irresponsible after that day, ever.
Yeah, it seems like that it's interesting kind of having that turning point of doing that. And yet, but all along you were looking towards that as a career as well. Now, early on, obviously, we're steered away from that, to say the least. What did you kind of tell me a little bit more about the double life of having people that supported you within general aviation versus kind of at home and school with not quite that support?
Yeah, so I mean I had like great parents. I love my parents, my siblings, but I grew up back in a very traditional day. You know, my parents worked in they had their own business, a mom and pop clothing store. So they worked 7 days a week, which did give me a lot of freedom. And you know, we were raised very Catholic. We were very Italian. I have two older brothers. And so I very much had my role in the family. You know, my mother would always say to me, I have two sons, you're my daughter. Act like my daughter. And so there was something, you know, I think embarrassing for my parents that I was, you know, I liked like machines. I liked being, you know, just very hands-on in a way that I don't think they expected of a girl. And so, and I, you know, I love my parents, my family. So I very much complied with all that. But then behind their backs, I made it to the airport, and then I found a whole nother world. And it was really just like day and night. You know, at the airport, although I was pretty much the only girl there, everybody there just looked at me as a pilot, not a female pilot. You know, I wasn't a girl. I was just somebody who loved aviation just like them, someone who enjoyed it, somebody who wanted to learn how to fly. Really, I felt just like I was like everybody else. And I didn't feel judged. I wasn't, you know, I didn't feel awkward or embarrassed anymore to enjoy the things that I enjoyed and to love the things that I loved. And that community is really, I think, what would really just, you know, just seal the deal for me as far as loving aviation.
Yeah, one of the things that stuck out for me about your story is it's such a wonderful story about just just a universal passion for aviation and striving to be that. It's almost kind of, you know, gender neutral of it. None of it was trying to prove a point, and none of it was based on having, and there's no favoritism or affirmative action helping you with anything. This was just a struggle to be one of equals along the entire way.
Yeah, I never thought, like, now I think we as a society are much more conscientious of a lot of things. When I was younger, it didn't even really cross my mind that I was like a girl trying to do something that people only pictured men doing. I just didn't, I don't know, I was a little bit innocent, naive. That's just what I loved. I enjoyed it. It's what I wanted to do. And I think only later, looking back, did I then realize how many people weren't happy that I was there, or how many people tried to sabotage it. And most people were wonderful and great. You know, like, I'm talking about the exception. There's always going to be an exception to anything. And for the most part, you know, all my experiences were positive, but there definitely was a, you know, definitely a feeling that people didn't feel like I should be there for all sorts of reasons. I mean, I used to have like passengers who would just get up and walk off the airplane when they realized I was their pilot. Wow. And I thought that was kind of funny at the time. I'm like, okay, see ya. Doesn't bother me. Good luck. But you know, but now I look back and I think, wow, those people actually like got off the airplane and were like stranded overnight at the airport just because they didn't want to get in the airplane with me. And of course, it was nothing personal. You know, they didn't know me from a hole in the wall. It's just that back then, just as a culture, I think people were afraid. You know, when they saw someone that looked like me. I mean, I'm like 5'3", I'm 110 pounds, so I'm not just female, but I'm like really small. If people get on an airplane and there's just like an inherent fear, and they want to feel reassured, they want to see somebody up in the cockpit that they envision as being, you know, safe, and that picture wasn't me. So I think that's changed a lot. I think that seeing a woman in the cockpit, or really any minority, is just completely normalized now. It's yeah. We're still you know, much lower number of female pilots and other minorities, but I don't think if somebody sees a woman in a cockpit now, they think, oh, this is some sort of a trick, or, you know, she can't possibly be qualified. I need to get off the airplane to save my life.
I can't imagine that, or at least I feel bad for anyone who actually has that viewpoint, to say the least. It sounds like, as you mentioned, though, it was very kind of segmented. Some people felt that way and some people didn't. You mentioned a story, I think it was 4th of July, of kind of, you know, coming clean, or lots of people, more people in your circle knowing that you were a pilot and just taking a bunch of people up to go fly around the Statue of Liberty.
Yes, those are actually people. So I went up with some friends of mine that my parents, friends that we had grown up with, that didn't go to my school, that didn't live in my town. And I think they knew that I was flying because their parents had told them, and I didn't feel like it was any threat for them to know. It wasn't like I talked about it, but they knew. So on the 4th of July, I just came up with this idea, hey, let's go to the airport, get an airplane, and go circle the Statue of Liberty, because that year the fireworks are coming off of Liberty Island. And you could do that back then. You could just rent a plane, fly to the Statue of Liberty, and stay low and,
Yeah.
and just, you know, circle it to it.
I grew up doing that, but I never almost hit the Goodyear blimp.
Oh, see, now you're giving away. Okay, so that wasn't our fault. So we were circling the Statue of Liberty. It was pitch black, and there were other planes that had the same idea. We weren't the only ones out there. And then it got very dark in front of us. Like, I couldn't really see the lights of the other airplanes. And I'm like, oh, I guess we just have an open space in front of us. Then all of a sudden, this screen just lit up, and it was the Goodyear blimp. I was flying directly into the side of the Goodyear blimp, and the screen, I don't know how big it is, but it was massive. And it was really quite shocking. It was quite shocking. But you know, yanked and banked and got out of there and didn't hit it. But that was a real close call, but I didn't intend to do that. I had no idea the blimp had floated in, because they had kept all their lights out intentionally so that they could then turn them on and announce themselves. And they put themselves into that, you know, into that traffic. So I was there first. I'm just saying.
I'm just saying. I was there first. Exactly. It's the bridge's fault. It wasn't me. Exactly. I like that. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned earlier, of course, with your son, that you've got a lot of affinity for Purdue, and that plays a pretty big role in your story. So tell me a little bit about Purdue.
About Purdue, boy, I tell you, Purdue is an amazing school. So when I was at Morristown, I knew I wanted to go to a college that had aviation in it. I had gone to my guidance counselor, and she said there's no such thing. And whatever, she was discouraging, to say the least, that you can't be a pilot, only men are pilots. You can't, other than going to the military, you can't like go to school to learn how to fly airplanes. So on my own, with my circle of friends at the airport, they had all told me you have to go to Purdue, because Purdue, I think Purdue has, just as far as aviation goes, more astronauts came from Purdue than any other school, including the military academies. I think 27 astronauts graduated from Purdue. Amelia Earhart was actually on staff at Purdue. When she went on her last fatal flight, she was flying a Lockheed Electra that was owned by Purdue University. It was actually a flying laboratory, and she was flying, paid. The whole thing was commissioned by Purdue to collect scientific data on that journey around the globe, which for some reason history seemed to miss all of that. But her flight had a real point to it. So I realized that I really needed to go to Purdue. That was the place to go. I really wasn't qualified to get into the flight program because I didn't take any math or science or physics in high school my senior year. My grades were fine, but the flight program was very small, very elite. Most of the kids who were in it, they had fathers that were airline pilots, and so they had been flying their whole lives. They had a lot more experience than I did. But I'm sorry, now my cat's climbing on my laptop. Okay, we're batting 1,000 here. So stop it. So I went to Purdue in a different major. I went there as an art major, and that was my in, because my mom wanted me to major in art, and Purdue had a good art program, believe it or not. So then when I got there, it was a matter of trying to transfer into the flight department. which was a really hard thing to do because it was very, very small. I think there was only like maybe 30 or 35 students in the entire flight department, and each one of those slots was super competitive to get, and they were full. So I was told, you know, first of all, you have to have your pilot's license before you even come to Purdue to transfer in, because the students the freshman year are going to get their license, and I wanted to transfer in after the first semester. I had that, but apparently a lot of people had that, so that didn't really make me competitive. And somebody also would have to fail out of the program or drop out of the program in the first semester for me to get into it, and I'd have to get in second semester freshman year so that I would be where my class was, because the classes all stay together for all 4 years. So the odds were super against me to accomplish all that. And there were a lot of people that were applying for a seat that probably wasn't even going to open. And so I just set about stalking the professors at Purdue. And I picked one, especially Professor Gross, who was a great guy. And he was in charge of making the final decision. And so I just regularly showed up at his office just to be his friend and, you know, let him know I really was serious about getting in. I would do anything, and I'd be a great candidate, and don't look at my grades. You know, I'm a changed person. And I did. Somebody actually dropped out of the program, one person, and I did get that seat. But it really was, I got it. I mean, I had the qualifications, but that isn't what got me the seat. What got me the seat was that I just absolutely, you know, showed the people making the decision just that I wanted it, that I really wanted it, and that I would make the most of it if I got it. And I guess I convinced them, because I did get the seat. So.
I always love it. There's one commonality, I think, among very, very inspirational people like yourselves and their stories about that drive and that perseverance. And I mean, obviously, jokingly, you're calling it stalking, but not giving up on it. You know, finding a way to make something happen. And I found that's a really interesting takeaway from a lot of things in your life story of pushing and pushing and pushing to make something happen if you believe in it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to do everything you can possibly do, and then you have to do some more.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that's really how you get anywhere far in life. You have to just look at it like that.
The other thing that there's a lot of that I found in the book and really enjoyed was there's also a lot of piloting takeaways. There's a lot of things that are like lessons to be learned for all of us who you know, fly an aircraft of any size. You spent some time in a mountain flying course as well that had some challenges.
You're going right for all my disasters. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I'm listening.
No. You tell me what lessons.
You want to hear my mountain flying debacle there?
Or whatever the takeaway, whatever you'd like to talk about, or we can always move on.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, that, you know, long story short, Purdue offered just these really amazing out-of-the-box experiences, and they had a program at Purdue where they would take a handful of students that were selected. We would go out to Laramie, Wyoming, and we would do our cross-country requirements for our commercial license in the Rocky Mountains, just like all around the, you know, mountainous terrain. And, you know, Indiana's very flat. Indiana offers a lot of great training in that they have all 4 seasons. You get lots of experience with crosswinds and thunderstorms and lightning and, you know, hail and snow and ice and all of that, which is, I think, really important when it comes to training. Don't learn to fly in Florida, learn to fly someplace where you're going to get, you know, educated on everything that's going to kill you. But they didn't have mountainous terrain. So they would send us out in the summer to Laramie, and we would fly just all around, you know, all those states, North Dakota, South Dakota, all of those states, Colorado. And on one particular flight, I was flying, you know, solo, and I was trying to fly from Granby, Colorado, back to Laramie, Wyoming. And the only way to get there was to go right through the Rocky Mountains. And I was flying 172, so the airplane didn't have the ability to get high enough to fly over the Rockies. And I just had some very, raw data instruments. So once I got, if there was any attenuation, anything blocking your reception, you have no navigation, no radios, you have nothing. So the plan was to fly right through the Rockies. I had picked out a pass on my Cheyenne sectional chart, and drew a line with a pencil, and I was going to follow that. Well, I got into the heart of it, and I got lost. The Rocky Mountains built up around me, and before I knew it, I was flying through passes. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't do anything. And it got really, really scary. It got dark because I was in the shade, because I was so far below the train at one point, and I had the chills, and I was just flying and praying to God, please let me fly around the next bend, and it opens up and I can see some daylight. And I flew around this one bend, and when I got there, I just saw just a granite sheet of rock in front of me. I had flown into a boxed canyon, and yeah, that was it. I just thought, wow, holy crap, I just killed myself. Damn. That was my thought. I just sort of surrendered to it. Like, I can't believe I just did that. But yeah, so if you read the book, you'll see how I got out of it.
There you go.
But no, I did some really crazy maneuvers, and I did. But I took out a tree. I actually hit a pine sapling with my landing gear, trying to scrape on the side of the granite, rocks to get out. And I did get out. But it's a much longer story. I could spend the whole night explaining how I finally got out of there. But
it's fascinating. And there's a lot about the things that go into becoming a pilot. I'd like to talk about for a minute. I mean, your journey, like many pilots, goes through all of the dues that you have to pay along the way, whether it's being a flight instructor or a freight pilot or all these things along the way. What do you, having gone all the way from the smallest planes as a flight instructor with the worst students, all the way to being a captain of some of the largest aircraft in the fleet, what do you think about that as a system? Do you learn that much during those early days in those tough circumstances that really pays off, or do you think it's just kind of the way we built a system without benefit?
I think there's two sides to that, clearly. Personally, yes, I really developed tremendous stick and rudder skills. Autopilot is not my friend. I prefer to just fly the airplane, and I'm comfortable flying the airplane. And also, you build a lot of confidence, a lot of self-confidence, because a lot of the flying that I did was single pilot. I was the only one in the airplane, and you're forced to do things that you didn't know you were capable of until you're forced to do them. Then you're like, oh, okay, I guess I was capable of that. I didn't kill myself. So I do think that path definitely built my skills, it built my self-confidence. That being said, it's crazy. It was crazy, and I don't think it's like that anymore. I think that I think the biggest challenge for me was that there was no path to the airlines. Like, you never knew what opportunity you could find next to build flight hours, but you have to build your flight hours. And there was just no, there was no internet. There was really no way to research. They didn't have these ab initio programs like they have today. They didn't have just a lot of the internships, all that stuff. None of that existed back then. So I think for me, it was a tremendous learning experience, and I wouldn't do it any other way. But if I had a son or daughter who wanted to do it, I think I'd be really grateful that they don't have to do all those dangerous things. And a lot of stuff that I did, I used to fly canceled checks, single pilot. They don't do that anymore. I used to fly cargo and freight, and not file a flight plan. And people don't do that anymore. Everything has just gotten a lot safer, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. So it's I'm glad I was able to get through it because I got so much out of it, but I wouldn't want to put that onto the next generation, because really, there was a lot of stuff that, could have gone wrong. So I think it's good that they have gotten away from, a lot of that really dangerous flying that, pilots had to do. They had to do to build their flight time.
Is there a natural kind of generational almost respect thing when you've flown with people that are of your generation of pilots, that many of which, if not almost all of them, have come through those kinds of systems, having to fly at night, having to fly through ice, having to fly in a time when people didn't view safety the same way or didn't have the same avionics. Is there a different level of kind of respect or trust, do you think, to people?
Wow, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good question. You know, everybody's an individual, Jeff, so I can't really say. Some people might appreciate it, others might not. And I think every generation, I have to say, so when I started flying, my very first airplane at United was on the 747. I was the second officer. And I was flying with, you know, they called them sky gods back then. We had, sorry, my cat again. Oh my God, sorry, I'm so sorry. Okay, but these guys, United had purchased Pan Am's international routes and their airplanes, the 47s, and the pilots that went with them. And so I was flying, when I first started with United, most of the pilots I was flying with were Pan Am pilots. And these guys were so respected. And as much as the generation now looks back to my generation, where we just navigated, you know, with these like old analog gauges and a swinging needle, and you'd have to picture in your head where you were. Equally, I had that respect for these guys because they used to fly using celestial navigation. So that I had a gauge with the needle that would swing and tell me where I was, I thought was like pretty, was pretty advanced. So I know that from my perspective, I absolutely did respect that they had experienced a lot of things that, you know, that I would never experience, and that technology would come a long way for me. So I hope, you know, that the younger generation also recognizes that, but I can't really say. I think a lot of them do. You know, a lot of them do, a lot of them don't.
Yeah. You actually flew with the pilot from the Tenerife accident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bob Bragg. Yeah, I sure did. So, boy, what an honor and a privilege. So when I was on the 747, I was based in New York, and again, a lot of the pilots I flew with were Pan Am, New York Pan Am pilots. And one of the captains I flew with was Bob Bragg, and Bob Bragg was the surviving first officer on the Pan Am KLM collision, the disaster, the largest air disaster in the history of the world. It still is. I think there were 583 people that were killed in that accident. And if anyone's not familiar with it, Pan Am was flying to a location that had a bomb scare, and so all these airplanes that were going there had to divert to different areas. And Pan Am, KLM, and a whole bunch of other airplanes diverted to the Canary Islands, to Tenerife and the Canary Islands. And the airport that they went to just had a single runway. They were not used to wide-body airplanes. The controllers were not experienced in handling, you know, wide-body airplanes. And after the emergency subsided and the planes were departing, there were so many planes parked in the taxiways that had diverted there, that the only way to get to the end of the runway was to get onto the runway, back taxi, get to the end, and then turn around. So KLM went first, Pan Am followed them, and when KLM got to the end and they turned around, a fog bank rolled in, and so they had virtually zero visibility. And it passed fairly quickly, but at that moment, they had virtually zero visibility. Well, Pan Am was still back taxiing on the runway, and KLM ended up taking off, and they had a head-on collision with Pan Am. And Bob was in the cockpit of the Pan Am airplane, and he survived. And he, you know, we flew quite a few trips together, very long trips, you know, 15 hours in the airplane. And he sat down, you know, with the piece of paper on one particular leg, and he drew a diagram of the airport, and he went through with me every single step of that day, everything that happened. And all the documentaries that I've seen, and I've seen many interviews with Bob where he's actually been on like the Discovery Channel and done different things, he told me stuff that has never been revealed, stuff that he has never said publicly, just what the pilots were thinking, what they were feeling, what they were doing, what his take was on what really happened, why it happened, what the cause of it was, just his emotions when they were about to be impacted. He ducked to save his life, and he did save his life. And you know, just it was just a real privilege and an experience, a learning experience, to have him explain to me in such detail, you know, every single aspect of this accident.
Any tidbits about what he thought that was like not necessarily, you know, reported dramatically about how something like that really happened, or what he believed?
You know, the one thing I'll say, I really don't want to like get into stuff that he said to me that he didn't want repeated. But the one thing, and I do have this in my book, the one thing that he said was he was part of the investigation when the whole thing was over. And so he got to listen to the cockpit voice recorders and hear the conversation between the KLM pilots amongst themselves. And what he didn't realize, he always believed that the KLM captain believed he had a takeoff clearance. And there was a lot of communication problems going on that he didn't blame the KLM captain for. But there was definitely doubt as far as was Pan Am off the runway or not, because you know, all the KLM pilots, the three of them, knew that Pan Am was back taxiing behind them. And when he listened to the cockpit voice recorder, it ends up that the second officer on that flight had said twice to the captain before takeoff that he thought Pan Am was still on the runway, and the captain just disregarded him. He thought he was wrong. He didn't soak it in. He didn't analyze it. He was like, no, they're not. And I think he truly, obviously, believed that Pan Am wasn't on the runway. I don't know why he believed that, but he wouldn't have taken off if he didn't believe that. But Bob, you know, was really, he said that was the most devastating part of the entire accident. Everything else was not intentional, or, you know, the links in the chain were broken. But when that pilot, you know, the highly skilled professional flight engineer said to the captain, no, I think Pan Am's still on the runway, and the captain didn't even confirm or, you know, yay or nay, he just ignored him. That really, really upset Bob. You know, that was, and that actually, that accident was the start of CRM at the airlines, you know, cockpit resource management, which, you know, is a big part of safety now, and it didn't exist back then.
Tell me a little bit about that, because one of the things through your journey, you talk a lot about respect in the cockpit and listening to everyone makes up the flight crew, including the passengers. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So CRM, the concept behind it, so pilots are highly, highly trained. So CRM has nothing to do with like your flying skills. You know, that's not in question. It really is just training for like your interpersonal communications. The point of it, I think, let me think some. The point of it is that one thing is that any pilot can fly with any other pilot seamlessly because of training and because of open communication. And the other real point of it is that the cockpit is a hierarchy, right? And in the hierarchy, you've got the top of the food chain and the bottom of the food chain. But everyone in that food chain is highly skilled and trained, and everyone has, you know, a different take on, you know, every situation. And it used to be that the captain was just the final authority, which the captain still is the final authority, but that the captain didn't feel any need to take in any advice or get any input from anybody other than what, you know, was in his own brain. And that had led to quite a few accidents over the years, because somebody makes a mistake and then other people are aware of it and they don't speak up. And then what happened with Pan Am, that was a really good example of how the captain was given the information and he disregarded it because of that hierarchy. And then I think the very next year, 1978, United Airlines had their DC-8 crash in Portland, which was almost the same thing. They were coming into land in Portland. They had, I think it was a gear problem. They were circling to troubleshoot it, and they were just burning through their fuel. I think they were partially in the landing configuration, so of course your fuel burn is going to really spike. And they flew until they had they flamed out. they flamed out all 4 engines from fuel exhaustion. And the flight engineer, had said repeatedly, we're running low on fuel. And the captain was so focused on, this gear and preparing for an emergency landing that and then the fuel gauges were behind you. So it's not like now where you're looking at them. It was kind of like out of sight, out of mind. And, after these incidences, after those 2, that's when the FAA and NASA got really serious about saying, okay, we have a hierarchy and we respect that, and you're the final authority, but let's open up the communication here, let all these professionals give their input. And I think at first it was a little bit difficult for some of the captains because they felt like their authority was being usurped, but most of them didn't. And in the end, of course, it just helps everybody because it's just more information. And it goes, as you were saying, it goes outside of the cockpit because, of course, the flight attendants are in the back. And, if they smell something back there or hear something back there, we need to know about it because how would we know? So we're very dependent on the flight attendants bringing that information forward to us. And then the one incident that you had touched, on one of my flights when I was flying, I was after we actually had, you're in Boston, we had just left Boston, we're coming back to Washington. And I was just standing in the door saying bye-bye, to the passengers as they were getting off. And one passenger stopped very briefly and said, I was sitting back there over the wing and it looks like there's a bolt or something that's like popped up on the wing. I don't know, it just doesn't look right. So I was like, okay. And, you could just sort of roll your eyes at a passenger telling you something doesn't look right in the wing, but I didn't. I'm like, okay, let me go see what he was looking at. I sat down in his seat and there was a bolt on the wing that was clearly had failed. So I went and got maintenance, brought them in on it, and then I ended up leaving. So I wasn't on that the next flight. The next pilots had gotten on board, and it ends up that was I can't remember the exact analysis was, but there was a fatigue, there was a failure. A main structural bolt had failed, and that plane was taken out of service, I think, for a week. It needed some extensive repairs, and all of that was because one passenger happened to notice it and brought it to my attention. So I don't know who he was, but thank you. You might have really done a really good deed there. More than he'll ever know.
Wow. Now, obviously, a lot of your journey is about, facing the uphill battle and breaking, some of the boundaries, being a female pilot along the way, and especially in the airlines. Tell me a little bit about that experience and what you think has kind of changed today, and maybe why we've come a long way, but not really ultimately that far in terms of percentages.
Well, when I started, I think female pilots, I don't even think there was a statistic yet. I think it was less than 1% of pilots were female. Like they didn't even keep records yet because there weren't enough to even record it. And now it's up to, I think it's like 5.5% of airline pilots are female. It's changing, and yeah, well, that's a really good question. Like, why is it so difficult to recruit women? It's really hard, and we do not have a shortage when it comes to flight attendants. There's not a problem there. So it's not like the travel schedule. It's just, I think that women in general, a lot of them don't picture themselves in that role. And like, why is that? I'm not 100% sure. But I do think that women are more cautious when it comes to like promoting themselves, and that I think that women, I think a lot of people, but I think women probably especially kind of sell themselves short a little bit if they aren't 100% confident that they can do something, or they don't see other people that look like them. It's much harder to go down that path. And so I think that is changing. I think it's changing like much quicker now than it was over the last 30 years. But there's some real initiatives now to expose young people to the aviation industry and to let them know that these are jobs that are out there. So
Do you think
But
some of it's a matter of time or for the system to work it through? Or do you think there's something else at work? Because when we look at the average kind of flight school or local airport, it's not 5%. It doesn't appear to be when you look at flight instructors. It appears to be, it's certainly not balanced, but it's not 5% from at least anecdotally, I should say, from what I see. I see plenty of
yeah.
primary instructors that are women and readily accepted and all over the place. But that number obviously isn't the same in the airlines.
Yeah, that's I really you're asking some deep questions, Jeff. I wish I had like a magic wand. I could say, well, this is a problem. This is how we're going to fix it. I'm not really sure. I think that a lot of people start off in aviation, and at some point you have to understand that being a pilot, a big part of that is being a pilot, flying the airplane, right? But being a pilot is also a lifestyle choice. You have to be on board with living your life on the road, and going to training every number of months. There's a lot to it that really affects your home life, and I think that for a lot of people, they love the flying, but then they don't love the lifestyle so much, and that can be very discouraging.
Mm.
So that could be a part of it. That could be a part of it. I don't, I loved it so much. So it's really like I'm probably not a good person to ask.
No, you're exactly the right person for it. So let's use that for a minute, because I do want to get to the flying part as well. And very few people have had that unique opportunity to be to be at the pointy end, to be at the flight deck, to fly the big aircraft, and especially when those aircraft reach even the top of the ranks, the 747s, the 777s, et cetera. Tell us a little bit. I mean, you've flown all the whole spectrum out there. What's it like to fly something that big, to fly some of the biggest aircraft that are out there?
How do you answer that? What's it like? Well, it's fun.
Is it that much harder? Is it that much different? Or do you find it completely different than flying general aviation in terms of what it's like to fly the plane? Or are there some commonalities?
I mean, yes, and yes, and yes. Yeah, it is harder. It is harder. It's definitely far more complex. But I will say a couple things regarding that. So it's more complex, but you don't just go from like a 172 to a 777. There's a lot of flying in between. So I'll just give you an example. So I remember when I was flying a Dornier 228, right? And that was just all, we had no autopilot, we had no auto throttles, just really rudimentary, raw data instruments. And then my next position, I was flying an ATR 42, which is all glass screens and LCDs and modern technology. And when I went from the Dornier to the ATR, I was like, oh my God, how am I ever going to like learn all this? This is so sophisticated. This is so advanced. But now, on the 777, I look back at the ATR 42 and I'm like, the ATR 42, that was so rudimentary. It was such a simple cockpit. So my point is that it doesn't really feel like it's that much more difficult, but because it's such baby steps. You do so many things. You work your way up. You don't just start off flying something that complex. So when you do get to it, it's not that bad because you have trained enormously, and by the time you get to a wide body, you have thousands and thousands of hours of flight experience, thousands of hours. And so it doesn't seem that overwhelming, but just literally, yes, it is a much more complex operation. But I will say this, the one really great thing about flying for the airlines is that you have an entire team of people behind the scenes that make you look good. The pilot, all we have to do is fly the airplane, but we have, a dispatcher who makes our flight plan, calculates our fuel. We have a meteorology department that, spoon feeds us the weather. We have mechanics. If I have any problem at all, I'm not out there trying to mess with it myself like I would be on a small airplane. I just get on the mic and say, hey, send somebody up here and look at this bolt on the wing. So you have, you have so many professionals that are behind the scenes that really do make everything seamlessly just flow and you know, make everything very, very safe. So when we're up there, you know, if I'm flying to Zurich or something and I get into trouble, I have a whole team, you know, just a radio frequency away that can give me all sorts of information. And when you're flying a smaller plane, you don't, you know, you're just on your own.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
that is.
Do you feel a difference in terms of like when you progressed and well, let me ask this: what was your favorite? You've flown Airbus, you've flown Boeing aircraft, you've flown large and small. What if you had to pick one? What's your favorite of the commercial aircraft?
Well, of course, any pilot will tell you that whatever airplane they're on at the moment is their favorite airplane. But if you have to look back over a career, if I had to pick, I think I would probably say the 777, the Boeing 777. And the reason I'll say that is because when I started flying, the 777 didn't exist. And United was their launch customer. We actually worked with Boeing for years, designing it and, you know, customizing a lot of things to meet United's very specific needs. And our pilots union was very involved in that. And so there was a lot of cool things about the 777 that were just like, you know, like special ordered by United. And then when the 777 was finally launched at United, I had really good timing. I was very, very fortunate that I had the seniority and I was in the position to bid it. So I got to be one of the first, you know, the first wave of pilots to ever fly the 777 in the world. So that's just kind of special. And it's a beautiful airplane. It's just a really easy airplane to handle. It flies great. It lands great. You know, it's just it just handles beautifully.
Hard to imagine at this point that it's, you know, it's actually been around for a while. yet it is.
I'm dating myself. Yeah, right. Everybody flies a 777 now. But I'll tell you, at the time, I remember I flew a trip to London, and we were on the ground there, and the pilots from the Concorde came over and wanted permission to look at our cockpit. So
Wow.
that was like, are you kidding me? Like, you guys fly the Concorde, you know? So, and they were impressed by our airplane. So that was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. But yeah, that was a long time ago. And the 777 is still flying. It's the workhorse of the airlines. It's just a really reliable, you know, just a beautiful airplane in every respect.
It's amazing. What about the difference? Because not a lot of pilots get the chance to really compare Airbus to Boeing. What was your experience in that?
You're gonna go there. Are you gonna go there, Airbus to Boeing?
Let's put you on record.
Record. So yeah, you want me to tell you my Airbus right there? I can tell you my Airbus story.
Go ahead.
Just since you went down that road, I was flying out to Denver for a check ride on the Airbus, and so I was sitting in first class and I was studying my Airbus manual, getting ready for the oral exam and all that. And this very, very nice, nicely dressed gentleman who was sitting in first class came up and asked me very politely, do you mind if I ask you, why are you reading an Airbus manual? So I said, I'm a captain on the Airbus, I'm just going out for a check ride. And it ends up he was the president of Airbus. He had flown in from Toulouse, France, and was going to Denver to observe the Airbus program at United Airlines. So I got into a nice conversation with him, and he said to me just what you said. He goes, what does Boeing do better than Airbus? And I'm like, well, do you have some time? And he goes, but what does Airbus do better than Boeing? And he ended up asking me, we had a long conversation. He said, can you just put all this in writing? Like, I really want to know from a pilot's perspective what we got right, what Boeing got right. And I wrote him a really long letter, and I outlined, this is where Boeing has you, but this is where Airbus has Boeing. And I sent it to him. And about 2 weeks later, I got this box in the mail. He sent me this beautiful Airbus model to thank me for you know, just for doing that. But as far as answering the question goes, because I see I've completely circumnavigated actually there are differences, and they're very different ways of thinking. Airbus is more into automation. You have a side stick, you don't have a yoke, you have a lot of empty space in front of you. You like look at your knees while you're flying, which takes a little getting used to. The navigation, like the Boeing had like, from what I understand, a patent on a lot of different aspects of navigation. So Airbus had to do things differently. So I think as far as the navigation package goes, Boeing's is a little more intuitive. Saying that, I don't need to go into all the details, but as far as the ergonomics go, Airbus totally has it hands down over Boeing. We have a tray table that you can like put down and like put your crew meal on, which sounds like not much, but let me tell you, after spending, you know, decades bouncing food on your lap and getting it all over your knees, it's really nice to have a table. The side stick, which I thought was gonna be really hard to get used to. I was really nervous because I couldn't even operate the mouse with my left hand on my laptop. And here I had to fly the airplane with a joystick with just my left hand. So I thought that was gonna be much more difficult than having a yoke in front of you that you can, you know, use either hand. You can just really grab hold of. But it wasn't. It turned out it was a lot easier than I had expected. But there's, yeah, I mean, they're both really, really good airplanes. They're really good airplanes. They're both comfortable to fly. They're both very reliable. I like them both.
I won't make you pick one. Message received. Well, Laura, we're close to the top of the hour now. Any last kind of words? We've talked a lot about, and a lot of people talk about inspiring people that are very young about getting into aviation. There's also, it seems to be, and a sweet spot for me in my heart is people that are looking to get into commercial aviation. Maybe already have their licenses, maybe flight instructors. Your story and your book is one really of perseverance and paying dues to get your way there. Any thoughts or words of wisdom for those that have that goal, that want to get there and find their way up with the majors?
Gosh, you know, I mean, I think my advice would be the same for anybody who there's anything that they really want to do, and that is, you know, I mean, of course, there's the be persistent, don't give up, but hard work, you know, it sounds like a cliche, but it's true. Nothing comes easy. And you have to just like accept that you're going to have to work really hard and you're going to have to believe in yourself. And, you know, like I said earlier, don't sell yourself short. You're capable of so much more than you realize. And I just think now there are different paths that you can go into to make it to the airlines. There's, you know, the commuters, the regionals now have pathways, programs to the airlines. So if you get hired by one of those regionals that already has a connection to a major airline, that's a great way to get there. And United has our new Aviate program where they're training pilots themselves. There's a lot of cool programs, but try to find a cadet program or something like that. So where you're flying, you already have connections, because that's a big part of aviation is the connections.
Absolutely, no question about it. Well, I want to show people a quick, before we go, a picture of the book. And I certainly recommend it. Jet Boss, a female pilot on taking risks and flying high. It's really a wonderful read. You can find it on Amazon. You can download it as well for Kindle. And it really, as I said, I loved it. It was a great story with a lot of information for people from every type of background or every separate interest. And so I definitely recommend that book very much. So Laura, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Social Flight Live. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very nice to be invited.
Absolutely. So thank you very much. And to everyone who took time out of your evening to join us here, thank you as well. We are again here to support you in general aviation and do everything we can to help support your flying and the entire community and ecosystem about that. We will be back next week on Tuesday, February 8th with GAMI's George Brawley on engines, an update on their fuel, as well as all sorts of good information on operating your engine. And on Tuesday, February 15th, I am so excited, actor and pilot Treat Williams is coming back for an encore performance. We are just going to do some hangar flying. He's got some great stories, should be a lot of fun as well. And so with that, thank you all so much for taking time out of your evening to join us here on Social Flight Live. And I wish you all blue skies.